As you recall, in the latter part of the 6th century, the Achaemenid Persian Empire began to expand towards the west. They took over Thrace, and the kingdom of Macedonia, which is not part of Greece, was still ruled by kings and continued to be ruled by kings, down to the king who ends up conquering Greece, Alexander the Great. The kingdom of Macedonia submitted to Persian rule. That is, they became a kind of client state of Persia. And that meant that there was land domination by the Persian Empire on the mainland of Greece, on the mainland of the Greek world. In 499, the Ionian cities erupted in revolt, aided and abetted by Athens, and the Athenians not only sent forces, but as you recall, they went to the capital city of the Persian satrapy in the west, and that capital city was Sardis, and sacked it, burned the temples, burned the city walls, destroyed both the administrative and the religious structures of the city. The Persians retaliated. First, they recouped control over Asia Minor in 493. And in 490, they moved in towards these upstart heathens who dared to defy them, sacked the island city-state of Naxos, and made it to one mainland jump, hop, skip, and away from Attica, Eretria, on the island of Euboea, where the temple of Apollo Daphne-Phoros in the city of Eretria was by them sacked. But in 490, a small but incredibly courageous band of Athenians, assisted by only one small, helpful platoon from Plataea, turned back a land invasion of Attica at Marathon. And in 490, it looked as if the Athenians had single-handedly saved Greece. In the flush of victory, it was decided by the Athenian state, the new democracy, that the old temple that stood, built originally some 3 generations earlier under Pisistratus, 2 to 3 generations earlier, sometime in the 6th century, this temple, the foundations of which you can still see on the Acropolis, needed a companion. This temple was not to be taken down. This temple was sacred. The sacred image of Athena, the wooden statue that was garbed every year in a robe that was brought in the Pan-Athenaic procession and placed on this statue, resided in this temple. It's the temple of Athena Polias, temple of Athena, mistress of the city. Polis is the city, P-O-L-I-S, and Polias, P-O-L-I-A-S, is the name for a female deity who is the city deity, the city protector. But there was room. You have to ignore this building that's here. Just for now. There was room on the north side of the Acropolis for another building. And another building began to be built. A building that we call the Older Parthenon. And here you see a drawing that shows you what the Acropolis would have looked like in the years after 490, when construction arose of a second, larger temple, also to be dedicated to Athena, so that on the Acropolis of Athens, unlike any other city in Greece, there would be not one but 2 temples to its patron deity. A temple to Athena Polias, and a temple to Athena Parthenos, Athena as a maiden. And so the foundations were cleared, and the bedrock was leveled, and the column drums were cut, and the columns were in the process of being erected, and much of the entablature, the Doric entablature of triglyphs and metopes, was carved out, ready to be hoisted into place when the columns reached the height of the roof. You have to imagine the Acropolis in those years as a very vivid, crowded place. Not one, but two temples, and in addition to the two temples, a ton of statuary. Over 50 chori, female offerings of females, the rampant horseman, the muskophoros, the ram-bearer, certainly other large-scale marble statuary, life-size or just under life-size, and then many, many dedications of lesser quality and lesser wealth, but no less important to the Athenians. Pottery that had been made by people in the potter's quarter, especially beautiful or especially large vessels like the kylix the cantharos from Nearchus, showing Achilles with his horses. I showed you a couple weeks ago when we were doing Black Figure. That was found on the Athenian Acropolis. It's an extremely large cantharos, not utile. I mean, nobody actually drank from that. It was a special dedication to Athena by the potter Nearchus. So you have to imagine the Acropolis filled with history, vivid history. History of the piety of the Athenians, the wealth of the Athenians, and the special connection of the Athenians to their patron deity, Athena. In that decade, after the glorious victory at Marathon, while the Athenians were busy making plans to elaborate and beautify the center of their city, the Persians were making plans to avenge what had happened to them at Marathon. And in 480, the successor to Darius, the Persian king who had been defeated at Marathon, Xerxes, world's best name for a king, I just say in parentheses. Xerxes invades the mainland of Greece, wins a battle at Thermopylae. Can't remember if I've put up. Yep. Invades Attica, and with the Persian forces arrives at the gates of the city of Athens. The city has been evacuated. People knew the Persians were coming. The city was almost completely evacuated. Everybody was moved out into the port down at the Piraeus. Walls were built, and the Acropolis was fortified. The old Mycenaean stone walls were bolstered, wooden palisades were built up higher, and a small final band of defenders got behind those walls to defend the sacred spaces and the honor and the primacy of the city of Athens. The Acropolis was surrounded by the Persians, and after some valiant defense, the Persian forces ascended up the east side. Very difficult, very tricky ascent. And what defenders did not throw themselves over the side of the Acropolis to their death sought refuge in the standing temple of Athena Polias, where they were hunted down by the Persians and murdered. All of the defenders of the city were killed. And then the Persians burned the temples. They burned the architectural construction fragments of the new temple that was being built, and they burned much of the old temple of Athena Polias, so that the entire center of the Acropolis was a smoking ruin. In addition, they mutilated the statues. They mutilated the dedications. Here are 3 of the 50 plus chori. They look pretty good here, and one of the reasons that they look pretty good is that they've been repaired by conservators in these places, because in these places they were hacked apart. They were beheaded. They were cut off at the knees. They were sliced and disfigured with axes. And the traces of those are visible and would have been visible to anybody coming back up to the Acropolis. Not a statue was left intact. But only 1 year later, in 479, in a major battle at Salamis, in the Saronic Gulf, between Aegina and Attica, the Athenian navy defeated the Persian naval forces. The Persian naval forces were bolstered by ships, sailors, and commanders from many of their satrapies, especially including Phoenicia. But it was to no avail. In a tremendous naval victory, the Persians were completely defeated and routed and retreated, never again to militarily threaten Greece.
Would the Persians have occupied Athens then after they burned it? Would they have stayed there?
No.
Okay.
Mm-mm. Now, you come back to your city. What do? Have a little chat.
I just read an article last week about the destruction of medieval religious iconography in England during the Tudor regime, going back and forth to Catholic and Protestant. It was really interesting. It's kind of similar to it.
I have a great article for you to read. It's called, a lot of this that I just did comes from this article. It's called Destruction and Memory on the Athenian Acropolis.
Oh, I think I actually might have downloaded that. Destruction.
It's from Art Bulletin. It's phenomenal.
Destruction.
Brilliant.
Memory?
Destruction and Memory. If you can't find it, email me and I'll send you a PDF. How old were you guys when the Twin Towers fell? How old were you? What grade were you in? Seventh? Seventh? Is that what most of you were in? 7th grade? 5th? 14? You were there? Oh my gosh. Oh, that's okay. We're all friends here. 10th. For those of you that were at the younger end of teenagerdom, does it seem like a big and vivid thing, or does it seem already like a story that other people talk about? Vivid? Yeah? Okay. I was just curious. I was actually teaching on that day, and I had to go in and tell a class. It was just surreal. It was surreal. It reminded me of when John F. Kennedy died. I was in 3rd grade when John F. Kennedy died. For people of my generation, that was the great divide. Everybody remembered where they were when they found out. And I wonder if people remember where they were when they found out about the Twin Towers. And I wonder at what point people are going, I'm going to ask a class, and people are not going to have that memory anymore. That's going to be another one of those on and off divide points. Okay. You have some ideas? What would you do here? What would you do?
We said we would rebuild, make a bigger and better temple, and show that like you weren't put down by the situation.
Rebuild immediately. Make a bigger and better temple. How many people thought that you should rebuild, make a bigger and better temple? Many of you. Many of you. That is very interesting. You think the Twin Towers should be rebuilt? Bigger and better? Who would have thought that that might be a good response to the Twin Towers? Why?
It's hard to explain. It just
Seems logical.
seems right, you know, it's knocked down as a big part of, you know, America. I would have done. I'm not a big, I guess. It's hard to say, I don't know. That one was memorial, I'm not a memorial, why is it be bigger?
Go back up. But most of you did not raise your hands, right? What would you think about rebuilding the Twin Towers? Okay. That's what you get when you just point in a general direction. Fine. So not rebuilding them because you would be afraid that they would be attacked again.
No, rebuild because it's gonna like I would just and that would
I actually lost you because at first I thought you were saying don't rebuild. You wouldn't rebuild them because it would seem like they would be a tempting target to attack again. What would be some other reasons for those of you who did not raise your hands right away? Yeah, rebuild the Twin Towers. You bet they're the blue sweater.
Well, I think that Twin Towers wasn't as much as like the center of the city as this would have been. I think it would have been better to have like a memorial for them, like the temple's like huge thing for them, so I think they need to rebuild it because their life
Revolved around it.
around it so much.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a little bit different that way.
Why would you not rebuild the Twin Towers? Why would you not?
well if you do it right away, it's sort of like overlook the fact that it
Jill, here, if you do it right away, it seems as if you're making it as if the event didn't happen, and you're not. There's no breathing space. There's no reflecting space. There's no mourning space.
well in theory, for example, there's never comes because they don't need
Oh
I
yes.
don't think Athens like the glut of temple space available and like didn't need
No, it's true. That's true. Practically speaking, there's a need for a temple on the Acropolis. Why? Why do you need a temple on the Acropolis back there? It's a place where they worship Athena, although there are other places in the city to worship Athena. What is one of the roles in city life that the temple played? When? What's the event? Not the Olympic Pan-Athenia. Where does the Pan-Athenia end? At the Acropolis. Where? At the temple to Athena Polios. The Pan-Athenaic procession, which occurs every single year, ends there. So it's true that you would need a temple. It's true that it's the center of the city. It's true that there's not, unlike office space in New York City, it's not like there are multiple temples of Athena in the middle of the city. There aren't.
not letting it happen and or going to attack them.
Yes, and that is what the Athenians decide. They are shocked, and they do not want the evidence of what they consider a particularly barbaric act to be covered up. If you rebuild, you cover up the proof that this act occurred here. You erase that. This was not to anybody's liking. And so even though it is the center of civic life and worship, the Athenians left the top of the Acropolis in ruins. And they took their resources and they bolstered their navy. That's exactly what they did. Because while we know in hindsight that the Persians don't come back, in 479, after 12 years, or no, 21 years of hostilities back and forth with the Persian Empire, there was no saying that now this battle happened to be the last battle. How would you know? So the Acropolis is left in ruins. What about the dedications? What were some other responses that you came up with when you were chatting? So many of you raised your hand and say, rebuild. Rebuild right away. What would you do with these? You come up to the Acropolis. The buildings are not salvageable. But the dedications, what about them? What would you do? Would you bury them? I'm asking you. Why? If you bury them, how are they a memorial? How is it an honor if you put them underground? Bury them? Who says bury them? Hardly anybody. What are you going to do all the way in the back? That would be a way to make them a memorial, right? To be kind of defiant, re-erect them. They are dedications, after all, to the deity. They're gifts. They're offerings. You'd want to clean them up a little bit because they're not looking so hot after they've been mutilated. Who likes that idea? Does that sound better? Make a memorial? No, hardly anybody's raising your hand. Okay, so hardly anybody raised their hand for burying them. Hardly anybody raised their hand for memorializing them. What are you going to do with them? What are you going to do with them?
Well, maybe not restore the old ones, but for them to be there.
Well, when you say just make new ones, these are dedications over the course of 200 years by hundreds of people and the work of many, many sculptors.
Well, I don't think I just don't think they'd restore the ones that had been mutilated, but that they wouldn't stop.
Who's they? Who put these dedications up here? Who put the dedications up on the Athenian Acropolis? Which people of Athens? How do we know? Yeah, wealthy, long dead Athenians who won games in the Panathenea or just had a lot of extra cash on hand and made dedications. It's very important when you think about this sort of stuff to think practically speaking. There's no they. They're individuals. Now, I mean, in a way, this is like saying, build a whole new office building and just put a whole bunch more people in it and then, make it all be the same again. What are you going to do with the dedications? What are you going to do? Leave them how they are. Why? What? So we've seen one thing that the Athenians have decided. They decided not to rebuild. One of the reasons that they're not going to rebuild is because they want proof, evidence that this atrocity occurred. Another reason is because they don't want to use up their resources on rebuilding. Those are city resources because those aren't individual dedications. That's a city expense. And another reason is probably that they're in shock. I mean, as we all realize from the fact that there is nothing different at the base of Lower Manhattan today than there was 9.5 years ago, it's not so easy to move so quickly. When something large and bad happens and you have to get some collective will behind to decide what to do. First, you have to decide how you feel before you can decide what to do. And that's not so simple either. When you think about these, what they have looked like to you. Have a little chat quickly. You are Athenians. You are about to go meet in the Agora. You're all going to gather on the Pnyx. You're going to decide what you guys should do about these. These are dedications of people from your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents' generation. What should happen to them and why? Chat. We're not talking to anybody.
If they choose they want to leave it at that.
What'd you guys decide?
I said I think I'd leave it up to the individual families.
Oh, but how would you find them all? And
well,
maybe
what
they're
I'm saying,
not.
if you can trace it back, you can trace the individual dedications or those families are still around. I'd leave those up to the individual families, and then as community youth. Because as those individual families, they can either decide whether they want to leave them the way they are as a memorial, or if they want to repair them and feel that's more fitting. But if you can't,
Are the dedications provided in such a way that you would be able to identify from generation to generation what your family has dedicated? Was it just
No.
Okay.
Some of them are. Some of them had inscriptions, but a lot of them did not. So some of them you would have been able to do that, but not a lot of them. But so that's an interesting idea, though. Okay, some ideas. We've got one idea back here. What?
I said leave it up to if you can trace the lineage of the dedications connected to the individual family, leave it up to them to decide what you want to do.
So respecting the idea that these are individual offerings, see if you can ask those individuals what they would like to do. Another idea. You guys are bad citizens. You know why? You're not engaged. Athenian citizens were yappy. They talked all the time. They had lots of opinions about everything. You guys flunk. You cannot be citizens of Athens. Yes? Why don't they put them back where they were originally? Okay, so there's a vote in the assembly for getting in touch with individual families whose dedications these are. Many of them certainly were the dedications of prominent families, people from prominent families, those families are probably still around. So some of those you'll be able to do. Not all of them, but some of them. So now you guys are all thinking about that. Suggestion number 2, to leave them, right? Re-erect them. Fix them.
Not fix them, no.
Put them up broken.
Yeah.
And that would do what?
I mean, when you disrespect the fact that they were dedications of, I guess, individual person, and it would also act as kind of memorial of the fact that that battle happened, a lot of people died.
So it would acknowledge the primary reason for having a dedication, but it would also acknowledge what had happened subsequent to the dedication being made. It would acknowledge both of those realities. Another idea.
Going on what she said, I wouldn't necessarily put them up together though. A certain area for them.
So in fact, as opposed to treating them, continuing to honor the fact that they are original individual dedications, transfer the meaning of them from that to make them into a memorial. So leave it up to the families, continue to regard them as dedications, but acknowledge that bad things have happened to them, turn them into an observable memorial. 3 options. Any other options? We're going to vote.
I would take that third one even farther and put them up to remain temples, or not temples, to enforce that sacrilege path made, and if that's fine.
Ooh, you guys like that? That's powerful. So a friendly amendment to making them a memorial, make them a memorial within the memorial that has already been decided upon, which are the burned out shells of the being built new temple and the ancient, now burned old temple. So 3 ideas. Any others?
Burial was such a part of their culture, or funeral pyres, but the honor
For
of families
people.
burial, for people, the honor, the family responsibility, bury and take care of their dead, was so important in this culture, and so
That's true.
because they are sort of a family, a part of an elite family's history. That's why I thought burial. That's the only thing I can think of. Is that such a
So kind of burial with honor.
yeah, have a ceremony and procession maybe.
All right, time for a vote. Notify the families. Let individual families decide. Ooh. Re-erect them, continue to regard them as they were originally intended, as dedications. Tough crowd. Allow them to stand as vivid reminders of the barbarism of the Persians by using them as memorials themselves within the burned out temple. Now, here's the difference between you guys and the Greeks. The Greeks buried them. They buried them because they couldn't stand it. They couldn't stand it. Because these were real conveyors of human ideas. And they had been so damaged that it was too painful to look at them. All of the dedications on the Athenian Acropolis were buried. It was swept clean. None of them were standing. They were buried by the Athenians in a huge cleanup operation, and they didn't come to light to the public eye until the late 19th century when German archaeologists excavated the great trench in which the Athenians had buried them. Because to you, now, here, today, their art, their creations, their statues, and what they are more than anything is not real. But that's not the way they were to the Athenians. These are not mutilated statues. These are mutilated bodies. So they were interested in memorializing what the Persians had done, but some things were too hard to take, and this was one of them. So for 30 years, the Athenians conducted their annual festival and went to the top of the Acropolis and made their dedications to a deity who no longer had a shrine, a standing shrine. The Acropolis was just empty. They did one other thing. They rebuilt part of the north wall of the Acropolis with fragments from the temple that had been under construction. Now, when you build a temple, you have a lot of different kinds of blocks. Most of the blocks are just building blocks. Square ashlars, those are for the walls, and for the stylobate, for the foundation course. There are just a couple categories of blocks that are specific to a temple. One are the columns, and the other is the entablature, the metopes and the triglyphs, the piece that goes across the top. The Athenians took those parts, not the blocks, the parts that would have said, I am part, or was intended to be part, of a temple. And they built them into the north wall. You can see them. What's the message there? What is the message? So we've got the response of memorializing by not rebuilding. We've got the response of erasure, erasing what happened, not having to look at it, too hard to look at, by burying the statues. And then we have this. Now, okay, it's certainly true that parts of the walls had to be rebuilt. The Persians had done a lot of damage. But there were plenty of things to rebuild with, number one. And number two, these are not really so excellent as construction material for building a wall. Column drums. They're round, for one thing. There's a lot of space between them. Can't make them tight-fitting. Why is that bad in a wall? Well, because if you've got a defender and a crowbar, pretty soon you don't have a wall. Not a defender, an attacker. So, what's the point of this? What's the message? What are the Athenians saying to themselves, and what are the Athenians saying to the outside world? Do you need to have a little chat? Okay, just have a quick chat. Okay, What do you think? Nope, person behind you. They use the experience to become stronger. It's a message of essentially defiance. Okay, we don't have these blocks to build our temple, but we're going to use them and we're going to display them.
We thought it was like exactly the same message as the U.S. sent when it decided to take pieces of the World Trade Center and put them in new Navy ships.
And that message was?
Pretty much the same thing. This is making us stronger. Like, I mean, maybe that's not the ideal purpose to use that for, but like it was more of a symbolic message.
That this building lives on, and so do we. Showing that they still have, you mean security in like a security blanket? Or what do you mean by security? Nice. Probably all of the above. Defiant, proud, saying by what they use and where they use it, we are still strong. We have walls. We can defend ourselves. And you are not in charge, anybody else, of the character of this place. You can burn it, but you can't destroy it. We're in charge of the character of this place. And we redefine it. "30 or so years go by. A generation. If you are born in Athens a couple of years before the Persian attack, you would have grown up with a demolished Acropolis, a rebuilt north wall. You would have never laid eyes on the hundreds of dedications that had accumulated over a couple of hundred years. You would have heard a lot about the Acropolis. You would have probably gotten sick of hearing about it growing up, how it was so beautiful and central and important, and the barbarism of the Persians. And over that time, as you were growing up, your city, Athens, was getting stronger. And one of the ways that it was getting stronger was that the city of Athens had made itself the head of a defensive league, a league of cities that joined together and promised to fight if ever again there was a Persian attack. The league was organized by Athens, but entered into by many, many city-states. And all the places in purple on this map are areas where there were city-states that belonged to this league. The league had its treasury on the island of Delos, which I've just outlined for you in red here. And therefore it was called the Delian League. Here's how the Delian League worked. Every city that was a member of the league gave a certain amount of money every year. That money went to the treasury on the island of Delos, or the sanctuary of Apollo. And with it, ships were built, because it was by having an active navy that the Greeks felt they would best be able to maintain a defense against the Persians. We have inscriptions, and you're looking at one of them, that record the annual tribute that the cities made to the League. At the top of the inscriptions is written, Athens and her allies. Athens was the kind of first city, but she was one among many cities. In 449, so let's see, 30 years after Salamis, 449, 30 years later. So now you're about 35 years old. Say that you were born a few years before that battle. You're about 35 years old now. You've grown up with no Acropolis buildings, but with a newly strong and newly revitalized city. Peace was made with Persia. An official peace, documented. Peace treaty was signed. You might think you wouldn't need the League anymore. Kind of like NATO. After the fall of the Iron Curtain. Like that was the whole point of NATO, in case you didn't know that. Somehow, though, we still have NATO. And somehow, the Greeks still had the Delian League after peace was made with Persia.
Was the Delian League founded in 449, or was
No. The Delian League was founded shortly after the Battle of Salamis. It was founded shortly after the last battle of the Persian Wars. So lots and lots of money was collected over the years. Now, after a while, what started to happen over the course of those 30 years was this. A lot of the cities in the Delian League were very small. Now, what was actually supposed to happen was you could give tribute or you could give ships. You could contribute a couple ships every year. But what in practice actually happened was that almost all of the cities, which were pretty small, couldn't muster the know-how and the manpower and the funds to build a few ships, which is complicated, time-consuming, and costly. So instead they sent money, and Athens built ships. And after about 30 years, Athens had all the ships. Nobody else had any ships. And then some cities didn't want to be in the Delian League anymore, and the Athenians wouldn't let them leave. And the Athenians, in fact, attacked some of the cities who had been part of their alliance to prevent them from leaving the League. And then, a couple of years after peace was made, the treasury of the League was moved from Delos to Athens. And there was in the city of Athens at this time a statesman. Of course, it was a democracy, so it's not like there was a president or something like that. But there was a man who, by birth and breeding and intelligence, was one of the great men of the city, and his name was Pericles. And Pericles made a speech to his fellow citizens after the treasury of the Delian League, a treasury that was intended to supply the funds for the defense of the cities against Persia. He made a speech to his fellow Athenians. Pericles told the people that they owed no account of their money to the allies who provided it, as long as the Athenians carried on the war for them and kept off the barbarians. For, Pericles said, not a horse do they furnish, not a ship, not a soldier, but money, simply. And this belongs not to those who give it, but to those who take it. If only they furnish that for which they take it. And now that the city was sufficiently supplied with the necessities for war, Pericles maintained that they ought to devote the surplus of the treasury to the construction of monuments, from which in the future would come everlasting fame, and which, while under construction, would supply a ready source of welfare by requiring every sort of workmanship and producing a wide variety of needs. these in turn would call into service every art, make every hand busy, and in this way provide paid employment for virtually the entire city, thereby ornamenting it and sustaining it, and at the same time. And so, the works arose. 30 years after Plataea, a whole generation, the Athenians decided to do what all of you initially voted they should do, and that is rebuild the temple on the Acropolis. The Acropolis that the Persians had damaged had a modest entry building at the top of the large ramp and stairs that marked the entrance to the sanctuary itself, and then a temple to Athena Polias, and a temple that was in construction to Athena Parthenos. Under Pericles, the Athenians decided to rebuild and finish the temple to Athena Parthenos, to expand and enlarge the gateway to the Acropolis, and to rebuild the temple of Athena Polias, but in just a little bit over on the south side of the Acropolis. So the gateway to the Acropolis is called in Greek the Propylaea. You can find lots of discussion about this in your book. It doesn't really need to be anything more than a little demarcation zone telling you that you are now entering a sacred space. But the Athenians decided to make it monumental, to make the gateway into the Acropolis practically temple-like in and of itself. So you're looking here at a modern view of the ascent to the Acropolis, and then the steps up to the Propylaea. You see a wing on one side and a wing on the other, and then a main central entranceway. And if you ascend the Acropolis today, you come up the steep steps and the columns of the Propylaea rise above you. And this would have been the way in which the citizens of Athens on the festival of the Pan-Athenaea entered the Acropolis. The Propylaea was constructed in the Doric order. It had a triglyph and metope frieze, no sculptural adornment. Colors, of course, but no sculpture. And walking through the Propylaea, when you come out the back end, what would have stood immediately in front of you was the area that the original temple of Athena Polias stood. If you would have been walking through here in the 6th century BCE, you would have seen a temple directly in front of you there. That place they left blank. That's why we can see those foundations today, because there's no building on top of them. The new temple of Athena Polias is off to the left. That's what we know as the Erechtheion. And the older, not finished, and burned by the Persians temple of Athena Parthenos, you would have seen off to the right. And that's the Parthenon. Now, during those 30 years, when the Acropolis buildings were left in ruins, another large temple was built in Greece, and that was the temple of Zeus at Olympia. The Eleans were pretty proud of their temple. It was the largest temple in Greece. Huge. Much bigger than anybody else's temple. 91 by 210 feet, the Temple of Zeus at Olympia. Marvelously adorned with a complex and vivid sculptural program. It's just gone up. It's kind of brand new. It's about 10 years old, or not even, when work on the Parthenon begins. You're on the planning committee in Athens. Your job is to improve on the Temple of Zeus at Olympia. This is Athens, after all. What will you do? Talk.
How far are they supposed to be restoring it? Are they gonna try to do the whole thing? Everybody I know, like, and when I went to, everything was covered by scaffold. So I was just wondering how far they were gonna take it.
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't actually know the answer.
It's kind of disappointing when you go and you're like, oh, scaffold.
Yeah, that must be very disappointing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that must not be much fun. How big was the temple? How many columns Temple of Zeus at Olympia? 6 along the front. How many along the side? The formula is 2x plus 1. X times 2x plus 1. That's the formula for a Doric temple. So if there's 6 columns on the front, how many columns down the side? Temple of Zeus at Olympia. Correct. All right, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? You. More sculpture. Oh man, those people at Olympia, 2 pediments and 12 metopes, what's up with that? Let's have more sculpture. What else are you going to do? Make it bigger. They say they have the biggest temple in Greece. Ha! We will make ours even bigger. What else are you going to do? How are you going to make it bigger? Right, you want to make the foundation bigger, which will make there be more columns. What else are you going to do? More sculpture, bigger temple. All in marble. Because I don't know if you have heard, but the Temple of Zeus at Olympia, those sculptures look really great because they've got stucco over them. Because the stone is the local Shelley limestone, and it's terrible. It's very... Marble is so nice. What else? What else are you going to do? Yeah. The metapiece? So, stories about the Athenians themselves. Stories about the Athenians themselves. What's it about with these stories about other places and people and other deities? That's no good. What else are you going to do? Fill it with more stuff. Nice. What else are you going to do?
Instead of making like a single scene in each make like a whole story.
You can make within the metope, or you mean like a...
As a group, instead of just like one, like at the Temple of Zeus, it was just like one
shot, like a cinematic still each time.
for each of the labors, and a bunch of one.
So it could be like continuous narrative, sort of shots, like individual shots within one evolving story. Ooh, what else are you going to do? Of course, Temple of Zeus has one of those, but not yet. Yes, make a statue that's got gold on the inside. That is showy. What else are you going to do?
More colors everywhere.
Have more colors. Have more colors. A little hard to tell, just mostly because we don't have colors left from the Temple of Zeus Olympia, but they probably did that. What else are you going to do? What else are you going to do? Find any way possible to make it more elaborate. Yes, all of the above. Temple of Zeus, 6 columns across the front, 13 down the side. Parthenon, 8 columns across the front, 17 down the side. Temple of Zeus, 91 by 210 feet. Parthenon, 101 by 228. Just enough bigger to be the biggest. 12 metopes on the Temple of Zeus, all 92 on the Parthenon had a scene carved in them. Pedimental sculpture related to the goddess Athena. First and foremost, not any of this her kids' business. Athena is the star of both stories. Athena is the star of both pediments. A gold and ivory cult statue inside the cella, inside the temple. Yeah, now we're talking. The West Pediment. The West Pediment, the Temple of Athena Parthenos, the Parthenon, was in really excellent shape, sculpture-wise and building-wise, until 1687. That's pretty good. That's a long time. What happened in 1687? I know you want to know. What happened is that it had been being used, so its use changed over the years. It was converted in the 4th century to a church, and it was converted in when Greece came under Ottoman rule to a mosque, and that was fine. And then it had Attica and Athens were held by the Ottomans in their ongoing battles against the Venetians, and the Parthenon was used as gunpowder storage, because it was very big and handy for that. And it was hit by fire from the Venetians, and the top blew off. And the center of the pediments and metopes blew out. A lot of stuff fell on the ground. And, it was a wreck after that. So it's a little hard to show lots of pieces of some parts of the sculpture. But we know what the story is, because Pausanias, our buddy Pausanias, the guy who messes us up at Olympia, because we can't tell the difference between what he means by right and left. He was more succinct and less confusing here, although we could have used more detail. Nonetheless, we have to be happy for what we get. And what we get is Pausanias telling us, clearly not too interested, perhaps like some of you, in what was the story about the sculptures. This was incidental to his touristic interests. But his tour guide clearly told him, and he wrote it down and tells us, that the story on the West Pediment is the battle between Athena and Poseidon for the supremacy of Athens. And that's how we know what the story is. And what's the story? You might want to know. Well, the story is simple. The Athenians needed a patron deity, and the gods were fighting over them. Well, of course the gods were fighting over them. It's Athens. Why wouldn't the gods be fighting over? All the gods want to be the patron deity of Athens. Athena, so it comes down to there's, final round, and it's Athena and Poseidon, and they have to compete. The Athenians are going to decide which deity they're going to select to be their patron deity, and the deities give each a gift to the city, and it is on the basis of the gifts that they give to the city that the Athenians will decide which deity they will bestow the honor of being the patron deity of their city on. So Poseidon gives a spring which is a salt spring. He's the god of the sea, so he has limited ability to give you something that you might find tremendously useful. Although in Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief, I would just like to say, because Percy Jackson is son of Poseidon. I hope I am not ruining this for anybody, but I think you find that out very early on in the movie. And there's a very cool scene at the end where he channels Dad, and he makes a lot of water cistern things on the tops of buildings explode and wash away the guy who's the real lightning thief, and it's very cool. He just sort of stands there and thinks very hard, like Harry Potter does. And then all of the water tanks explode and all the water comes gushing out. So you have to imagine something like that similar with Poseidon. And he hits a rock with his trident and a salt spring gushes forth. And the Athenians all say, okay. And then Athena comes along and she makes an olive tree grow. And we all know how important the olive tree is to Athens, because it is from the olive tree that you get olives, and it is from olives that you get olive oil. And many other people want olive oil, which is a good product, both for lighting your lights, cooking with, and also cleaning yourself off, and it makes a nice moisturizer. And then you have this product that is good for you and good to sell, and it is the main prize in the city's games, and so Athena wins. And the moment that is being portrayed on the West Pediment is the moment when Athena, Athena, has made the olive tree appear, and Poseidon is leaping back in amazement. And so there is this vivid scene where the great prize of the city of Athens comes forth, and the two deities who kissed and made up after this, because they're brother and sister after all, or uncle and niece, I guess. So they make up. So this is this great pivotal moment that shows the strong connection of the city of Athens to Athena. And, of course, the tremendously fundamental connection of and pride in the city that Athena had for the Athenians. Sadly, we do not have the center part of the East Pediment. We have these drawings in an amazing, cool, just totally cool coincidence. In the year 1674, less than, or just, 13 years or something before the top of the Parthenon blows up, some guy came along and made drawings. And we've got drawings of parts of the sculptures that he saw. So we've got, and we know from Pausanias what the story of the East Pediment is. The East Pediment's the front of the building, incidentally. You would have walked all the way around, then you've gotten to the front. The story of the East Pediment is the birth of Athena. It's a single moment in time. The moment when Athena has emerged from the head of Zeus. At that single moment in time, it is just that time in the 24-hour cycle when the sun is coming up and the moon is going down. The horses of dawn, the horses of the sun, are arising in one corner, and the horses of the moon, exhausted after their long night, are taking Selene's chariot home. So where the East Pediment of the temple of Zeus was fixed in place by the Cladius and the Alpheus, by the rivers, this pediment is harnessed to the turning of the planet. It's harnessed in time. The gods are all present. They're all 12 gods in the East Pediment. So whoever said more gods, you got them. Check, more gods. Here they are. All of them. Everybody present and accounted for. They are in varying states of finding out what's going on. Some of them, for example, Dionysus, down here at the corner, doesn't have any idea what's going on yet. He is watching the sun come up. That's always a nice sight, right? So that's what he's looking at. So he's lounging on his beautifully rendered robe while the sun is rising. Oh, whoops. Come back, Demeter and Persephone. But just next to him, word is coming forth. Artemis is hurtling forward, rushing out with the news, and the mother and daughter duo of Demeter and Persephone, one is just turning from looking at the sun coming up to say, oh, something's going on, and Persephone sees Artemis coming and turns to her. So this is very vivid. When you look up, you get the sense of this moment, fixed but eternal. The sun comes up every day, and every morning Athena is reborn on the East Pediment of the Parthenon. And the moment and all of the reactions, the dawning awareness of the majesty of this event is crafted by the differing levels of knowledge that each of the characters in this pageant are receiving. Down at the other end, likewise, there is a troupe of goddesses. This, beyond a doubt, is the most beautiful carving of stone that anybody has ever done. While they are still there, and perhaps they will be for the rest of my lifetime, if not yours, in the British Museum, you should go see them. Try to make it to London. Just stand in front of them and imagine that this was a block of stone in the ground.
Who are those three goddesses? Aphrodite and...
Oh, we'd love to know who they were. Yes, we would love to know. Most everybody believes that this is Aphrodite, because who on earth else could that be? That's the reason. I don't know if scholars are supposed to have something cleverer than that, but that's it. That's it. Because everybody since the beginning of that they were made has looked at her and said, oh, that must be Aphrodite. Who else could that be? The problem is that she doesn't, unlike Persephone, Aphrodite does not have a natural companion. Persephone must go with Demeter, who's her mommy. But Aphrodite, so I don't know, sometimes these are I don't know. They have lots of different identifications. We don't really know where they are. And that's why they are called the three goddesses. All right. So that's the two pediments. And when you come back from break, we will finish the Parthenon, which will include discussing, don't worry, we don't have all 92 metopes. We can't possibly talk about them all. And another little prize, sculptural prize, hidden inside the building because there's yet more sculpture. And I wish you all a very good break. Good work. Start working on your papers if you haven't done it already. You must start working on your papers if you haven't done it already. It is impossible to do this in one night before it's due. Thank you. Yes? The metope, oh yes.
So sculpture.
Yes.
As far as so it's not freestanding sculpture.
No, the metopes count as architectural sculpture, and